Got John Bryce on the line from Gridiron Now, breaking down the Vols as the orange and the white clash at Neyland Stadium on Saturday. It's an SEC Network game at 2 o'clock Eastern time. And looking at the rest of the SEC Eastern Division, John, of course, Georgia, there could be an argument that they have the biggest gap between them in terms of what's expected and the talent that's proven on that roster, despite all the NFL losses, versus the rest of the division. Maybe the biggest gap there between first and second of any team in college football. South Carolina goes from 3 wins to 6 to 9. Will Muschamp maybe proving that he's more than a defensive coordinator. I have to sometimes catch myself, John, because I typically just think of this division as Georgia, Tennessee, and Florida, and then everybody else. But it's a much different division than it's been in the past. Mizzou took some strides under Barry Odom. Kentucky went to a bowl game last season for the first time in a while. Just your thoughts about, or the second consecutive season after a gap there, after a drought for the Wildcats under Mark Stoops. But just your thoughts about the division, and maybe a different take than maybe the cut and dry take. Who could possibly jump out and surprise us?
Well, I think that Florida has the ability to jump out and surprise. There's still some nice talent on the Gators roster. I think that at South Carolina, I've talked with some folks in Columbia and talked with some coaches that have been at some of South Carolina's practice. I think the key thing for the Gamecocks is going to be the running game. How much can the Gamecocks lean on that running game when they need to? And you wouldn't expect to say that about a Will Muschamp team, but I think that South Carolina really threw the ball around a lot this spring with Bentley. Deebo Samuel, when he's healthy, is about as electric as anybody in the SEC. He's a big-time player. Missouri, there's a lot of Tennessee eyes looking that way to see how Derek Dooley does in his return to college football as an offensive coordinator. He has not been an offensive coordinator before, but Drew Lock said that Derek Dooley was a big reason why he elected to return to Missouri, and is really encouraged by what the Tigers are going to do on offense under Derek Dooley. So for me, those are the teams that provide some intrigue, particularly I think South Carolina and Florida this year. If anybody can catch Georgia, it would be one of those two teams, or if anybody could try to trip up Georgia, it'd be one of those two teams. Tennessee just really has a what I like to call a widowmaker stretch of schedule, where they've got 6 games that includes like Auburn, Florida, Georgia, Alabama, South Carolina. I'm leaving out one really good opponent, but it's the meat of the season. And Tennessee has a 6-game stretch that I don't think will be rivaled, not just by anybody in the SEC, but anybody in college football. So because of that, I think Tennessee has to set modest goals under Jeremy Pruitt. I think they'll be a much more fundamentally sound football team. I think they're already, in a lot of ways, a better coached football team. I think Butch Jones made a tremendous mistake with his moves at offensive coordinator after he lost Mike DeBoer. Frankly, I think he should have fought a lot harder to keep Mike DeBoer. And then we saw just an abysmal Tennessee offense last year under Larry Scott. It was really dreadful. So I think Tennessee's better coached. I think they're more fundamentally sound. I think they'll fight better in a lot of games, but I just think they've got some holes, and they have to go to Athens, and you can't overlook that, especially as part of that stretch of games that Tennessee has to play.
Yeah, Tennessee with that automatic disadvantage of having to play the Crimson Tide each and every year is that cross-division rivalry. And then when the rotation comes up on Auburn, and they just went 7-1 last year, you're looking at 2 7-1 teams in the SEC last year, one the national champion, and it's by far the toughest road of any team in the SEC Eastern Division, having to play the two from the West. Interesting take on Butch Jones, John. I'd like to get your further synopsis of what went wrong there, because even though the wins weren't coming against the elite teams, they were on the cusp. What was it, that 2015 season with the double overtime loss to Oklahoma, taking Alabama to the last drive of the game, the Arkansas game slip away. Of course, they had the 4th and 16 game against Florida, but they looked to have, after that run of top 5 to 15 recruiting classes, the talent, and then at that point, the veteran leadership to make that run, and it just didn't happen. And then you mentioned the offensive coordinator change. Did you think that that was what really tipped the scales and sent it downhill the other side?
Yes, I do. I think that Tennessee was very close for a couple of years under Butch Jones, but I have a saying I like to use: you never get those wins back. You can never get that win back from 2015 against Oklahoma. And really, a lot of people started to sour on Butch Jones in that game when he at home elected to kick a field goal early in the game, literally from inside the 1 yard line. I was the sideline reporter at that time. It was about the half-yard line. And Tennessee elected to kick and get the early 3. And the Vols defense was playing good, and nobody knew what Baker Mayfield was going to be at that point. But a lot of those games, that Florida game, you had a 27-14 lead in the fourth quarter, I think with 10 and a half minutes to go, and kind of found a way to lose that game. And that was too often the problem. And really in 2016, for that team to have gotten off to a 5-0 start and had Texas A&M on the ropes and be on the verge of a 6-0 start, it's important to remember the Vols fell behind double digits to App State, Virginia Tech, Florida, Georgia. I mean, almost everybody during that stretch. Ohio was the only team that the Vols didn't fall behind by double digits as they opened the season 5-0. They kept finding ways to win. A guy like Jawan Jennings makes a singular once-in-a-lifetime play at Georgia that kind of glossed over some of those mistakes. But I just think that Butch Jones just found a number of issues. But really, I think his moves and in the strength and conditioning program, you cannot overlook that. He ran off Dave Lawson for some reasons that are still pretty mysterious to this day. And Dave Lawson's as respected in the strength and conditioning community as anybody in the country. But he ran him off. He made changes at the head of the nutrition program, and then he lost Mike DeBoard. And I think those three things and some discontentment among players really doomed Butch Jones. And I think the stage ended up sort of swallowing him a little bit.
Great insight into Tennessee football from John Bryce. You can check him out at Gridiron Now on Tennessee and the rest of the SEC right there. John, we appreciate you stopping by for the first time here at Mark Rogers TV. Hopefully it won't be the last time.
I hope not, Mark. Thanks a lot.